Hello, my name is Michael Garrick, and this is Popping Culture Movie Reviews. My guest today is a comedian and film nerd, Michael Clayton. Thank you so much for coming on to the movie review.
Thank you very much, man.
No problem. Guys, Michael Clayton, very funny comedian. If he's in your city, make sure you come out to one of his shows. He's hilarious. The movie you chose was The Shining. This will be a 100% spoiler review. But before we spoil the movie, Mike, do you believe they should watch it?
Absolutely. I think The Shining is not only one of the best horror films ever made, I think it's just a remarkable film top to bottom. And I think it's definitely, ranks among one of the classics.
Nice, nice. I 100% agree, guys. I think you should definitely watch it. Everything past this point is 100% spoilers. Um, Mike, any special reason why you chose this film?
Yeah, so I love the director Stanley Kubrick in general. Like Doctor Strangelove ranks as one of my favorite movies as well. I think he's just a remarkable filmmaker. Um, I love when directors who aren't primarily associated with horror do a horror film because I think they just bring such a different approach to it. And what I love about The Shining is there's so much of it that is open to interpretation. Like there's things that hint that there are a supernatural presence, but there's a lot that's hinting a lot of the psychosis might just be in the main character's head, Jack Torrance's head. Um, and I like that duality. And I mean, there's an entire documentary, Room 237, that's just about how people have interpreted The Shining. And to have this movie where you can have 30 different people watch it and they all have a completely different interpretation of what exactly is going on is just a movie that is kind of a gift that keeps on giving. Like, I don't think you can ever watch The Shining and each time you watch it, not get something new out of it.
I totally agree. For people that don't know, this movie is based on a book by wow, I just
Stephen
forgot
King,
his Stephen King. How did I forget Stephen King's name? Stephen
very
King.
loosely based too.
And that's what I was about to get to. Have you read the book by chance?
Yes, I'm a huge Stephen King fan as well, which is one of the other reasons that I love the film. He's my favorite author, and even though the movie takes significant liberties with the book, you know, when people say it's nothing like the book, I agree stylistically it's nothing like the book, but I think you can still feel some like Stephen King DNA in certain scenes of the movie for sure.
In your opinion, do you feel like Stephen King not liking this movie made sense, or do you think it was kind of like you had an ego trip?
I don't think it's an ego trip. If you're a writer, I mean, and I've heard many writers say this in the same way that if somebody took your joke, it's like somebody
Yeah,
took one of your babies. Like, it is his baby. He wrote that book. He spent months putting that book together. Do I prefer the movie over the book, even though I love the book? Yes. And do I think there's anything wrong with the movie being different? No. But if I had worked that hard on something and then somebody's putting a portrayal of it and it's not at all what I was going for, even if it's good, I can understand why I would have an objection to that. He has also warmed up to it in the last few years, not where he's necessarily a fan, but where he says, I recognize the brilliance of it, but it's not the story I wanted to tell. Um, and it's the same feeling I have about like Martin Scorsese when he says that superhero movies aren't cinema. I don't agree, but I also think Martin Scorsese can say whatever the fuck he wants about film. I don't have to have that opinion, but I can respect where it comes from and why he feels that way.
yeah, I
Um,
totally agree.
yeah, and I think Stephen King is perfectly within his rights to feel that way. I just don't completely agree. I have a different perspective, though.
It's nice. I just want to get your opinion on that. When it comes to the opening scene of this movie, how
Oh
do
yeah.
you feel that it just sets the tone perfectly? Like, how do you describe the way he set that tone?
So the opening is so good because it kind of plants the seed of dread while not even doing that much. Because the opening scene is just them driving up a hill to get to the hotel, and it's driving, in this circuitous route, and there's kind of like this wide, looks like probably what like a helicopter shot coming over the waters. But it just makes you feel so dwarfed by the scenery around you. It makes you feel like you're almost going to be swallowed up whole by the scenery around you. And this car just seems like so kind of, you know, timid against it. And even the way they do the credits is very just kind of flat. And that music is just so haunting. I mean, they've parodied the music in so many movies now, but that dun dun dun, it just does such a great job of kind of setting the mood. And one of the best things that I like about The Shining is it's not this movie that just throws things at you. Each scene is kind of building this block of dread so that when everything does finally snap, it's like it's been, tightening the piano wire the entire time. And so it kind of sneaks up on you and how creepy it's making you feel. Like there's so many moments in that movie where I'm like, oh, what is that feeling? Oh, I think I'm feeling very uncomfortable right now. Like, and you don't realize it until you're kind of in that moment.
Nice. Nice. I totally agree. Was Jack Nicholson, was he already a star before this movie?
Oh, unquestionably. He was, I believe he had already won an Oscar at that point. Yeah, for Cuckoo's Nest, because Cuckoo's
Oh,
Nest
this
came out
is
in about 75.
okay. I did not
Um,
know this was before. Okay. I thought Cuckoo's Nest
yeah.
was after. Okay.
So The Shining was shot in 79 and it came out in 80. Cuckoo's Nest was about 75, and he was an Easy Rider in 69 in like a supporting role. And he had also done Five Easy Pieces, The King of Marvin Gardens. So he was already an established actor.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, he was certainly a big name by that point. Kubrick almost used him for a Napoleon movie too that he had
Hmm.
worked on. Wanted him to play Napoleon, and that movie just never came to fruition. But he had a lot of love for Jack Nicholson, and I know had been wanting to work for him for a while. And every interview I've seen with Jack Nicholson, he's also had nothing but raves to say about Stanley Kubrick.
Nice. Nice. So do you think, besides, of course, Stephen King, because everybody wanted a piece of Stephen King at this time, even now, do you think Jack Nicholson is one of the other reasons why this film was made?
I think so. So to go back on why The Shining was even made as a movie, Stanley Kubrick had done a movie called Barry Lyndon prior to that, which Barry Lyndon is a fantastic like period piece, but it had also done a lot of things that were kind of new at the time. Like every period movie that you had shot before, all those like costume dramas, you shot them very flatly. And he actually started to do like slow zoom in shots and things like that on a period piece. And he had only used natural lighting on the movie. And so it made every scene kind of look like a painting. Now, the funny thing is that was kind of looked upon unfavorably because they're like, that's not how you shoot a period piece. And now every period piece shoots that way because it was such a cool look. But at the time the movie came out, it bombed. Like it was a genuine bomb. So Stephen King basically said, I need to make a movie that's going to be populist entertainment that will turn a profit because otherwise Warner Brothers won't let me do whatever I want because he wanted to have complete control over his film. So he basically agreed to adapt The Shining as kind of a financial move
Okay.
to just kind of have something that would be more likely to be a hit, which still, The Shining was a hit when it came out. Although critically, it was kind of maligned by a lot of people when it first came out. It was actually nominated for some Razzie Awards when it first came out, which is
Yep.
funny because it's, now a classic and now nobody would say that it's a bad film, but people didn't quite know how to respond to it in some circles when it first was released.
Hey, man. You think there's any Adam Sandler movies where people will be like, you know what? They shouldn't have got that Razzie.
I wonder if he might have one of those careers where like for example, when you look at like Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin, like they have some very good movies, but their entire body of work is kind of research. Like they did all these comedy movies together, and I'm like, yeah, some of them are classics. A lot of their movies were fluff. So I'm wondering if that might happen to Adam Sandler. Like, well, he'll be idolized for his body of work, and then you go, yeah, but outside of like 3 or 4 movies, a lot of this was fluff. Like,
I could imagine that like 20 years from now, people will be like, you know, he hit those 90s hard, but
well, and he is an exceptional actor when he's given good work too. I mean, Uncut Gems was phenomenal.
yeah.
And I think he can be a very good actor. I think he mainly does jobs now because he wants to go on vacation somewhere. like and I don't begrudge him that.
Yeah, I definitely don't doubt him. He getting that Netflix money. I'm not mad at him at all.
Yeah.
Uh, um, but are you a fan of like child actors? Like, do you think child actors like are good majority of the time?
I think they're good as long as they're playing children. And what I mean by that is like I'll give an example. People raved about Dakota Fanning when she was younger. And I think Dakota Fanning has grown into a very good actor. But a lot of the roles that they had her play, they had her act like an adult in children's roles. Like she would be way too mature for her age. She would be way too insightful for her age. She would, and you obviously, if you're a good actor, are going to be insightful to a certain level, but you need to portray yourself as if you're not as insightful. Like actually, Abigail Breslin in Little Miss Sunshine, she played a little girl. She was a fantastic example. You believe she's a little girl. You know, she's a smart kid for her age, but she's still a kid.
Yeah.
And, is able to portray that emotional range really well. I think Danny Lloyd in The Shining, I think, does a very good job.
Yeah.
I think he's certainly seems to be more intuitive than most kids his age, but he's still a kid. He gets frightened easily. He gets nervous. He's kind of curious and maybe more curious in situations than he should, but he certainly has those childlike elements in certain scenes. Um, so I'm not opposed to child actors. I think, and I don't even ever really think it's the kid's fault. I think some of the ways that people direct child actors doesn't come across naturally.
Yes, yes. But like you said, I think he dominated. Like I think this was a great performance by him in this film. Like not and I'm not against child actors either, but I've seen them when they're not directed well. But he was directed
Yes.
well and he definitely came to perform. And then we get to the mother, Shelly Duvall, Wendy in the movie. Wendy. Wendy, after reading the book, Wendy was exactly what she was supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I felt, and clearly, like, even though I love Kubrick, there's a lot of questionable details about how she was treated on the set.
Oh, wow, I didn't know about
Yeah.
that. Okay.
Yeah. Like just not like any kind of sexual context, but there was a lot of there have been suggestions that he was very abusive on set with her to kind of get this frightened performance out of her, which I don't think is how you should do things. There are people that you can admire their work a lot and think that their work is amazing, and then be like, "Yeah, but I don't know that you should have done that." We're still people. like,
You mean like
um,
Joss Whedon stuff?
yeah, like similar stuff to that, where I don't think it was sexual in nature. I think the problem is if you read Kubrick's biography, and he comes across through a lot of his biographical materials as a genuinely sweet and gentle man in a lot of ways. But the one problem with Kubrick is the final product of the film, the end always justified the means. So like he would have people work 12, 14 hours if it meant that the movie was going to be that much better. He would kind of overwork people. And so like if you had to play a woman who's screaming and frightened through the entire movie, if making you genuinely scared and frightened through most of the movie, he felt was going to benefit the film, he was going to do it. And so I think the problem is I think sometimes his desire to get what he wanted on the screen sometimes overruled treating people how they should have been treated. Like not where I think he was necessarily an evil man, but I think that he certainly could have done a lot better on treating performers humanely. Because there's no, I don't care how much you love film, and I am obsessed with film. Treating somebody horribly to get something out of him is not the way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's
Yeah.
yeah. Uh, that shot can only be so well. You don't need to get that perfect shot. Like you don't have to go over the limit for it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. And now Shelley Duvall, the last time she was interviewed, she said only good things about Kubrick. So, maybe those stories were inflated. I hope they were. I'd prefer that. But like, if that was the case, I certainly don't think that should happen. But she unfairly gets criticism for that movie sometimes, but I think she's great in the film.
yeah, me too.
Like the scene that actually one of the most uncomfortable scenes in the movie for me is not even horror related. It's when she's talking to the therapist and they ask like why Danny's arm got broken, and you see her smiling and like making light of like Jack's domestic abuse. And it is probably one of the most accurate portrayals of somebody covering for somebody who's a domestic abuser I've ever seen in film, because she's trying with every inch of her being to try to act like, people are making a big deal out of this, but it's not okay. And you can see she's uncomfortable as she's telling the therapist, and you can see the therapist is uncomfortable. And it's actually kind of like this weirdly heartbreaking scene where she's smiling the entire time and trying to kind of downplay it.
Yes, yes. I'm forgetting a little bit before we get to the twist. Of course, Why was he? How did he get that job, Jack? How did he get the job?
So he was a writer who had, in the book details this more, but he was a writer who had lost his job as a teacher and basically had like flipped out at school, had been an alcoholic and had been drunk at school. So he was wanting to take a job where he could sustain an income, but also have enough time to write a novel, like because he wanted to work on a novelist as a novelist. And so he took this job at the Overlook Hotel because he'd basically be working as a caretaker, but he'd have all this free time in between managing the hotel in which to work on his novel. And his wife and children, of course, were coming to this basically what was a ski resort that was off season to like kind of stay in the hotel with him during that season.
Nice. Okay. Cool. I was just making sure I got. All right. I remember the teacher part. I remember him being alcoholic and everything. I couldn't remember how he got it. Okay. And when it comes to like taking care of the place, I like the fact that it's like it's a slow build. Like it shows him taking care of the place, and
Yeah,
then it slowly shows him like overly taking care of the place, like treating it more like his family than his own family.
it does. And the movie also brilliantly plays into, isolationism is a big part of horror, putting people in a very limited setting. In fact, you're seeing more with like slasher movies. One of the things you'll notice every slasher movie now has a reason on why cell phones aren't working. Either they broke or like they fell in the water or like they're on a retreat. Like there was one horror movie recently where they were on a no technology retreat because they have to figure out a way to have people disconnected from that. And The Shining is perfect because it has this isolationist type of approach where these people are stuck in this hotel the entire time. If anything, this is the perfect movie for the pandemic because like people stuck inside for so long, it's like, well, no wonder he went crazy. Like,
Exactly. Exactly. When it comes to the pacing in this film, how do you feel? They went around with the pacing.
I think the pacing is actually kind of a masterclass in building suspense um, because the movie does not try to rush anything. I find the movie interesting from beginning to end, but it's not a movie that tries to give you all the creepiness right away. And one of the biggest problems that a lot of horror movies have today is they want all the scares to come right out at you. But this movie and another movie that came out the year before, Alien, are like a masterclass on creating an atmosphere where no matter where you are in the movie, there's a sense of discomfort in every scene just because of the way the atmosphere is created in these environments. A lot of credit needs to go to like the set design too, because even the way that the Overlook appears in that movie just feels haunting at all times.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I agree with the pacing. I can't think of one scene that I would cut out.
No, no, it's a very taut film. And it's also one of those movies that you almost get this tinge of excitement when stuff starts rolling. Like the scene where she comes up on the typewriter and you see that he's been mentally ill for far longer than you expected and deranged. Like from that scene forward, there's almost like this blood rush that you get the rest of the scene because you're like, okay, anything that happens from here is going to be fucked. Like you're like, this is really going to be in for a ride. And from that moment forward, it's what you've been building to the whole time. And then it's just a fever pitch. And then it just starts, all hell starts breaking loose.
Yes, yes. One of the scenes that's been parodied to death. The two girls in the hallway.
Yes. The
Um,
Grady sisters.
for the longest time, I had no idea what that was, and then I finally saw The Shining, and I was like, okay, this deserves to be parodied as much as it has been.
Yeah. And The Shining is also one of those movies. Like I always say, if you haven't seen the movie, yes, you have. You just didn't know it was The Shining yet because you see it in so many movies. I mean, I remember in Twister, like when they're out at the drive-in movie theater, movie they're watching is The Shining.
Yep.
Like, and then Ready Player One's had parodies of it. There's been other movies. They recreated a scene for Doctor Sleep in the hotel, which actually I thought was very well done. But yeah, you've seen so many representations of The Shining because it's just one of those movies that the way it's filmed, almost every shot looks like a photograph. I mean, you can freeze almost every moment. It just feels kind of iconic. One of the quotes that Kubrick had to Jack Nicholson on the set is he said, the key to making a good film is not to take a photograph of real life, it's to take a photograph of real life. And the idea of that is if you see a lot of those scenes, like the scene where Jack Nicholson kills Scatman Crothers' character
Hmm.
and then kind of leans up into the frame with that ominous look in the axe, it's in no way a pose that somebody would have in real life if they just killed somebody with an axe. But there's almost this operatic approach to how the characters are positioned, how the scenes are set up, like that just makes the whole thing come to life even more.
Yeah,
I mean, even
exactly.
the way he carries himself with the axe out in the snow, like where he's kind of lunging over, it's still just such a creepy way to walk. And I'm sure most people with an axe don't walk that way, but it just brings it to life even more.
Well, that goes back to what you said about working 12-hour days. He probably started out walking normal, but after 12 hours, that back got probably got a
Yeah,
little slip.
yeah.
Like God, we still doing this? Okay. Um,
One of the best little tidbits about that movie too, the scene, the iconic scene where he's breaking through the door.
mhm.
So Jack Nicholson worked as a volunteer firefighter. And so the first time he hit the door, he like broke through it the first time. So they actually had to get another door, like a stronger door for him to actually chop through a few times because he was so used to like chopping through a door as a volunteer firefighter that the first door they had just fell apart after the first hit.
Hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you know what kind of door they got for the final
I think
shot?
they had just had like a set door and they just
Okay.
probably got kind of a cheaper door to break apart.
Okay.
It's not like he would have just been able to tear through any door with one hit, but like they had kind of a stunt door, and then they're like, well, we probably have to get like a more conventional door because he's just going to tear through this.
Yeah, that makes sense. Uh, but yeah, that's just and with his putting his face where between the door, where the hole in the door, that is also just something that's so iconic. I think it's on a few of the posters. Like,
And
was
Child's
that?
Play also, the
Yeah,
fifth Child's Play film they also had it.
yep. And it's one of those things where in real life, if a real life situation, I'm pretty sure it wouldn't be as scary, but on film it looks scary.
Yeah, I remember Kevin Smith talked about when he made Clerks,
Hmm.
how he said everybody came up to him and said, I love your movie because you talk the way that I talk. And he said, that's not really true, though. My characters talk the way we wish we would talk. Like, if you're actually talking to your friends, the way that you usually talk is like, what did you do this weekend? Got laid? Cool. And then you go back to playing video games. You usually don't have these, like, you'll have them on occasion, but you don't constantly have these, like, very intellectual discussions about pop culture just in random conversation. Like, that's not how you approach everyday things. But film always is idealizing certain ways that you're communicating things.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Like I said, the only director, and this is very biased, but the only director where it's like, okay, I do talk like this is Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah, yeah. And I think he certainly now, I think the one thing I'll say about Quentin is he has almost like a cadence to the way that he delivers lines that's very unique to his films. And it's interesting because there's like certain actors, like Samuel Jackson, just knows how to read Tarantino poetry. Like he knows how to make it pop like that. But you'll every once in a while you'll see like a supporting actor in his movies that don't quite get the cadence of his lines, and it is almost like and I'm not trying to say this in terms of like that Tarantino Shakespeare, but similar to Shakespeare, you have performers that are just good at doing that type of dialogue, and I think the same thing with Quentin Tarantino also.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I agree completely. You notice that he
yeah,
keeps the same group of actors. Like,
yeah, and like some actors, like I still maintain, I think DiCaprio's best acting work in his career has been in those two Quentin Tarantino movies he's done. I think
yeah.
he's exceptional in both.
And did you ever hear the story? Samuel Jackson was like, "Yeah, he's a great actor. This ain't his first time saying the N word either. This is."
Yeah, yeah.
He was like, Sam was like, I learned very quickly. Like he was like, I'm so sorry, I feel bad about saying him. Sam was like, oh, he said this, Lisa. He got practice.
I did hear something similar to that.
Yeah, like he didn't
Um,
want to say it on. Apparently, he didn't want to say it while they were filming. But I think Sam was just like, yeah, I understand he didn't want to say it while we were filming, but he's had a little. He's done a few push-ups, and yeah.
yeah. Well, yeah, like I started. The funniest thing I remember about that was the character Don Johnson played.
Hmm.
That was originally supposed to be played by Kevin Costner.
Hmm.
Um, and I had a friend of mine who's like, "Man, I wish Kevin Costner would have played the role." And I'm like, "Why do you say that?" And I'm like, "Don Johnson was good in that role. He was a really deplorable character." He's like, "I just feel like I could believe it more if Kevin Costner was saying the N word." And I'm like, "That was your that was your guideline on why you think he would be better? That's such a weird. It's not even racist. It's just weird. Like
Is this person black?
this person was not black, which made
Oh,
me
okay.
very
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. For some reason, I understand now since they're not black. Like, okay, maybe I kind of get why he said it now.
I
But
could see where he could have been an interesting character for that. Like, I think Kevin Costner is a good actor.
yeah,
Um, but I thought Johnson fit that role really well and
yeah,
actually got the comedic parts pretty well.
he nailed it. That's what I was about to say. Like I'm not saying Kevin isn't funny, but like if anybody, like that was the main reason why they should have cast this guy because he was like funny and also just like very evil at the same time. Like he had a great balance. Like
He was very funny, but he was not funny enough that you were going to shed any tears when they killed him. Like,
oh yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
like, which
Yeah,
is
great,
exactly what you wanted for that scene.
great. You put it the
Uh,
right way. Exactly.
but
Um,
yeah, there's a few directors that will have dialogue in a way that I feel is pretty authentic. But like a lot of directors, and it's not a bad thing, it's what I like about them, have a very stylized approach to how they're filming actors, to how they're doing lines, that sort of thing.
yeah. Uh, the scene that it confused me the first time I saw it, but after doing some research, I figured out why he did it. But the first time you saw the scene of the blood in the elevator, did you get it?
I didn't get it initially. Now, as somebody, who's been a lifelong horror film, it's such an evocative image, and it's actually kind of an interesting image because it's a fairly bloodless movie for most of the film. Outside of the blood coming out of the elevator, there isn't that much blood in that movie. And there's not even that many people that die. There's essentially two fatalities, if you don't count that the Grady sisters are already dead by the time you come there. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's one of those images. I mean, the entire first trailer was just the blood coming out of the elevator. And I mean, it's kind of a perfect example of what a good trailer is. A good trailer should show you nothing barely and make you want to see it. Like Christopher Nolan, when he did Inception, first scene you saw was a scene of Joseph Gordon-Levitt like running up the walls and stuff. And you're like, I have no fucking clue what's happening in that movie, but I have to see it. And
Yeah.
that's the sign of a good trailer. And like when you watch the trailer for The Shining, it's just blood coming out of an elevator. I'm like, I have no idea what that's happening. I have no idea what this is about, but I want to see this. Like,
Yeah.
um, I thought that was it's another scene that's been endlessly parodied in a number of films.
Yeah. I love the fact that like as I get older, I budget more, like mutual funds, blah blah blah, stuff like that. But literally the last time I saw it, well, I watched it 2 days ago for this review. But when I watched it, my mind literally went to like, that's a lot of corn syrup. Like they spent a lot of money on all this corn
Yeah, and
syrup.
I feel sorry for the actors that have to go through being in scenes with that sometimes too. Like I remember Jessica Chastain. She did a movie in It Chapter. She did a scene in It Chapter 2, which I think had the record for most fake blood used in a scene up to that point.
I believe it.
Uh, and she said that like the thing that sucked was for like a good solid 7 or 8 days afterwards, she was still finding like fake blood that she had to wash off after multiple showers. It just sticks to everything.
Yeah.
Like one of my favorite quotes about that was in the third Nightmare on Elm Street, the kid who plays there's a kid that gets like strapped to a bed
Hmm.
and it gets cut up by Freddy. But the way they had to film it was they sat him upright, so it was almost like he was being crucified for the scene, like as the way the blood was rushing and all that. But he said, the reason I think they choose teenagers for all these movies is because they subject them to so many horrible things, like that teenagers will put up with it a lot better than like a guy in his 30s would.
True. True that. Like that makes total sense. Unless you get a guy that has like 6 kids and be like, fuck, man, this is all I got. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. But yeah, we get to the ending. The bartender. I want to make sure I don't forget about the bartender. Um, that guy, he really is my favorite character because he just his is just so mellow, and you don't realize like because he's literally not in the movie a lot either. Like, but when he's in it, he just plays it perfect.
Well, and just how all of the ghosts or the figments of Jack's imagination, however you want to take it, all of them speak in this like articulate way that still feels so menacing. Like when he's talking to Gray in the bathroom, he's like, your wife is trying to bring in an outside party. And like, that is not a line that should inspire any kind of discomfort, but there's just something so unnerving about every calmly delivered, articulate line that everybody does in that movie. Because you just know every line that they speak, you can hear their ulterior motive behind it. You can hear that there's something else going on that they're trying to provoke. Um, and Jack Nicholson at that bar scene, I mean, is just spectacular. Like him laughing, like, where he's like a little slow tonight, and then he just starts bursting out laughing. It's another scene that I don't know if it's supposed to be funny, but I find like weirdly comical each time. And it's just, it really is a remarkable performance from him. And yeah, like the bartender is just this really, really unsettling presence because you can just feel him kind of prodding Jack along
Yeah.
and kind of fostering this delusion, and you just know it's going to not end well.
Yes. Yes. And then we get to the final scene with that picture. And
Yeah,
the way that story is just tied up with a little bow on it, it's just like this is what this is what I want out of a movie. Like,
yeah. It's funny too is it's the 100-year anniversary of that picture too, because the
yeah,
picture's date is 1921. So like, um, yeah, it's such a great ending to the movie. Um, I think one of the key things about horror movies is most of the time you want to leave people questioning whether or not the threat is still around, or whether it still exists. Now that became just commonplace after it was really Carrie was the first movie I remember doing that. But even when the Shining came out, outside of Carrie and Friday the 13th, you did not see that kind of ending to a horror movie that often. Most of the time, the threat was vanquished and life went back to normal near the end. But like, I love the fact that you kind of leave going, was he always a part of the hotel? Was he integrated into the hotel? Did he just become a part of it? It just raises so many questions. And that's, one of the great things about Kubrick's movies is they aren't happy meals. You don't eat them and then you're done within an hour later. You can feast on them for the rest of your life and still get little things from it. The Shining is just one example, but The Shining is certainly a great example of that.
nice, nice. I 100% agree. We're not using the microwave, we're using the stove.
Yeah,
1 through 10, what would you give this movie?
I'd give it a 10 for sure. There's some small flaws you could probably say in the performances, but from a technical level, there's no question it's a 10. Like the steady cam shots, everything. And then I would say the performances, I would say, are at least a 9 out of 10 across the board, with plenty of them being a 10. And then atmosphere's 10, and then just how well the movie works. I mean, it's so fun when I show people that have never seen The Shining to this day. They all walk away going, man, that movie really holds up, like for a 1980s movie. And even friends of mine who are not great about slow paced movies will usually have the patience for The Shining, because they're like,
Yes.
the movie never lets me think that there's not something coming from all this tension.
Yes, I would agree. I would give it a 10 myself. Just to add on, I think that the soundtrack, the theme they went with the music, just helped that film so
Yeah.
much. Uh,
I sometimes think about how much music is important to film. Like I've said before, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I love Star Wars. The most important person to Star Wars to me is John Williams, because John Williams just makes, and not that George Lucas wasn't a genius for what he did, not that the actors didn't do a great job. I'm not minimizing any of their work, but there are some scenes in Star Wars that, like him looking at the two moons and then playing like the John Williams music, like the doo doo. It's so powerful in a way that if you didn't have that music, it just would not resonate in the same way.
I agree. I 100% agree. Also, man, I would love to meet the person or the people that thought of like, what would lifesavers sound like?
Oh yeah, yeah, the sound effects, because it still sounds awesome.
Yeah, and it
You know,
sounds correct too. Like when you hear it, it's like, yeah, that's it. That's what it would sound like.
what's funny, I've read when you read about a lot of sound effects and visual effects engineers, they're either like really like blue collar dudes or they're big nerds. There's no in between. And like I remember when they did Wes Craven's New Nightmare, like Nancy Heather Langenkamp's husband in the movie is a special effects artist, but he looks like a preppy white guy. And he said the sad thing is all the special effects artists were like these heavy metal shirt wearing like bearded dudes. So I felt very, very lame. But I remember Evil Dead, the sound effects supervisor on that. he was like really, really nerdy. And there's a scene where a guy gets stabbed in his Achilles tendon with a pencil. And it's
Mhm.
like a very, very brutal scene, but it has this like sound. They basically stuck a pencil into an apple and moved it around to get the sound effect. And he called it plotzing noises. And so, like on the set, he would go up to Sam Raimi and he's like, I think we need more plotzing noises, like in a very nerdy way.
That's perfect. Dumb question, but I gotta ask: do you believe that this movie has become a part of pop culture?
I think it's not only a part of pop culture, but I would dare say, I think there's only a handful of movies that have inspired the level of enthusiasm and the level of like fan obsession that this movie's inspired. Perfect example: Lee Unkrich, who directed Toy Story 3 and
Mhm.
worked on a lot of the earlier Pixar movies. He actually had, in the early days of the internet, the biggest fan site of The Shining in the early days of the internet. He ran it because The Shining is his favorite film too. And in fact, there's a couple of callbacks to The Shining in Toy Story 3. And I've heard pretty much in most of the movies he's worked in, he tries to sneak one in because he's that big of a fan. But he's not, not alone. I mean, the number of people who are just kind of not only just love the movie but are obsessed. I almost feel weird because being such a film nerd, people are always expecting me to have some type of like really snobbish type of selection in terms of what my favorite film is. Like I think they're expecting me to go like, the best movie is Cherries at the Gate. It's a Ukrainian film that not a lot of people have seen. But the truth is, I mean, The Shining is just endlessly entertaining. It's a well done film. Most people I know enjoy the movie, and I know probably 15 other people who say it's either their favorite movie or one of their favorites. I think it's just a movie that sits with people in a way that still works, 40 years later.
Yeah, I completely agree, man. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on to the movie review. Is there anything you like to say to your fans? And please tell them where they can follow you.
Absolutely. You can follow me at Clayton Comedy on Twitter and on Instagram. I'm also on Facebook. Um, I just, like I said, I always love being able to, first of all, talk about film with anybody. It's, one of my favorite things, but also just love being able to chat comedy with another comic. And just want to take a shout out too. Like, I've gotten to see you twice now, and like both times you tore the room down, man. You did awesome. I'm
Uh,
really, really glad that you're in comedy, and I like having a number of people from many different backgrounds who are bringing the funny and being able to offer a different perspective, especially on a topic like pop culture, where I could talk about it for hours.
yes, man. Uh, I mean, same for you, man, dude. Like when I saw you, bro, you killed. Like, seriously, if he's in your city, make sure you see him. But yeah, man, thank you so much for coming on, man. Um, thank you guys for listening and have an amazing day.